this computer. Perfect. Been with Lilly for 3 years in sales. Started out as an intern, and I'm only 4 years out of college, so I can definitely relate to being in college, although I can't relate to going to college in a global pandemic. But if you have any questions about adult life or resume reviews and interviewing, I'm happy to help any way I can. So navigating in a remote world, it's useful under multiple circumstances, not just a global health pandemic, because by 2028, 73% of all departments will have remote workers. So whether you're talking about an interview, whether you're talking about actually working remote, knowing these things and being cognizant of technology is going to be super important for you as you move forward in your internships and your careers. So let's talk about an interview. Okay, so pre-interview, things that you want to be cognizant of. Know yourself. Obviously, become comfortable with talking about yourself, who you are, your skill sets, because at the end of the day, an interview is really just a mutual get to know each other. We want you to understand more about the company and the role, and we want to understand more about you, your skill sets, and why you think you'd be a good fit. Know the company. I feel like this goes without saying, but I definitely think it's important to note regardless. Put your Google skills to work and learn about the company. You never want to go into an interview with just kind of base level knowledge of for example, with Lilly. Yeah, I know Lilly's a pharmaceutical company and that's about it. Like, we want to make sure that you've done your research, you know why you want to work for Lilly or whatever company it is that you're interviewing for, and just make sure that you are showing your knowledge that you've done your research. Know the position. Know what the company is looking for. Again, it goes back to research. Understand what the role entails and how your skills fit that role. And then finally, know the logistics. Time, attire, and your location, and be prompt. This is the one that changes just a little bit in a virtual world, so I wanted to spend a little bit of time on it. So I put a slide in here for logistics for a remote interview. Just to touch on some things that are a little bit different when you go from the virtual world, from the in-person world to the virtual world. So obviously software, you're not, looking at somebody face to face, you are, but through a screen. Make sure you have the software downloaded and a user account created pre-interview. Test your audio video capabilities prior to, and know that most companies use Skype, Teams, or Zoom. This might sound super elementary to you all, but as a recruiter, you don't know how many times I've gotten onto some sort of interview and someone's had technical issues, and it either delays the interview or it causes us to reschedule. And that's not only, a little bit of a barrier for both us and you, but also it's not the most professional look. So we want to make sure that we can minimize any barriers. Obviously, sometimes technical issues happen, and that's okay. But so long as we're trying to minimize those barriers prior to, likely it will make you ultimately successful in engaging in a remote interview. Time. So this is actually something that I struggle with a lot with Illinois, because I'm in the Eastern time zone and you all are in Central. And so when I schedule meetings, I now make myself cognizant to say, hey, I'm scheduling in, at 10 o'clock Eastern time. That's 9 o'clock your time, to make sure that we're on the same page, because the last thing that you would want is for you to interview with the company, and typically your computers will automatically change this, but it's always good to note. You don't want to interview with a company that's maybe based in California, that's Pacific time, or in Indianapolis, and it's Eastern time and you're on Central and you miss an interview. So definitely something just to keep note of. And then location. I know it's hard because you all are in college right now, so you're probably find yourself either in a dorm or an apartment with roommates, but try to find a quiet atmosphere where you can focus, a neutral background if possible, to just minimize any distractions. And so going into location a little bit, like I mentioned, minimal traffic and distractions. And this is more so if you're find yourself working full-time, remote, or even, as a student interviewing and doing schoolwork remote. Make sure that you just consider your workspace and accessorize it to fit how you work best. I know it's so easy to be a student and like work from your bed, like study from your bed. But it's one, if you have to turn on your Zoom camera, we obviously, no one wants to see you sitting on your bed. And so you want to make sure that you're trying to pick the most appropriate place and minimizing distractions. And then mastering your technology. Make sure you keep your technology close to your outlets. You never want your phone, your computer, whatever it is that you're using to interview to die midway through an interview. So like I said, things you probably know, but it's important to be cognizant of, because the last thing you would want to happen is for something small technologically to happen that maybe hinders you from having a successful virtual interview. Okay, so you've prepared for the interview. We're now talking about game time. First impressions are huge. In person, obviously there's a lot of cues that you receive when you meet somebody for the first time. Their hand gestures, their eye contact. Some of that doesn't go away in a virtual interview. And so you want to be cognizant of those things, and know that even though we're not in person, you can still, you still have a first impression that is made when you, engage in a virtual interview. And then we talked about behavioral-based interviews. They go beyond your appearance and credentials. And so for the next part of my presentation, I have a question. What does behavioral-based interviewing mean? Feel free to pop off mute or pop in the chat. I'd love to know what your definition of behavioral-based interviewing is. And I think I should be able to see the chat. Okay, what are some good things to know for the interviewer to get to know what kind of person you are, a way to assess the individual's values and how they match the company? All really great responses. Anything else? How you would respond to specific situations. So I would say that's pretty spot on. Is behavioral-based interviews, all of these answers are great and go into why we do behavioral-based interviewing and how you fit the work culture, how will the candidate respond. Like I said, all great answers, and they all do tie into what behavioral-based interviewing is and why we do it. I think to sum it all up, Cameron, you wrote how you would respond to specific situations, and a couple of you wrote that, and I think that really hits the nail on the head, because your past experiences and your past behaviors, I shouldn't say experiences, your past behaviors will indicate how you will react to something in the future. So if we know how you handled a situation previously, you're likely to handle it like that again, in addition to what you learned from doing it that way. And so that just helps us better understand who you are as a person and how you would handle things. And so behavioral-based interviewing, when we ask a behavioral-based question, what we're looking for is an answer in what's called STAR format. STAR stands for situation, task, action, and result. And it's a way of answering an interview question, essentially like you're telling a story. And so we'll go a little bit deeper into this. So developing a story, obviously, a good story, but specific and diverse examples of your skills and competencies to prepare you to answer any form of the most common job interview questions. So if you create, 4 to 5 examples in your head of stories that could maybe be applicable to multiple job interview questions, that will help you prepare for truly the bulk of a lot of the behavioral-based interview questions that are asked. We'll go a little bit deeper into that. A good story leaves a lasting impression and is the best way to market your skills and competencies. So story breakdown. So what do these words really mean? So situation or task, the description of the activity to be completed. The action is going to be the steps you took either versus the group, or if it was, an individual story that you're relaying, the steps that you took as an individual. You want to be specific, but you don't want to be overly detailed, because then you may find yourself rambling, and next thing you know, we lost the intent of you telling that story. And then you can also point out actions that you considered but did not pursue if they make sense and are relevant to why you're telling the story in the first place. And then what was the result of the project? How did your actions provide value for the greater good of whatever task you're describing, whether that's outcome for the client or the customer, feedback you received, a grade. It doesn't all have to be professional. It can also be your academic experiences. And then most importantly, like what you learned, or if it's something that talks about, for example, tell me about a time where you maybe had a situation that you handled incorrectly. What did you learn from it? Like you can talk about the actions that you would take next time, given what you learned. So the result is really just dependent on the story that you're telling, but ultimately we want to know what value you provided, what was the outcome, any tangible results you can give, or what you learned. So with behavioral-based interviews, here's some examples to get you started. Focus on what you have done, not what you might do. So describe a difficult person you've had to work with. Describe a time you've had to work under an aggressive deadline. Tell me about a time you failed. How did you deal with the situation? And then tell me about a time when you made an unpopular decision. And a couple of these questions are actually from our behavioral-based interview guides. So these are real questions that we ask candidates, both interns and full-time, to get to know more, again, about the way that you've behaved in a previous experience and the value that it provided or what you learned. So we're gonna put it into play. I've got this like 5-minute exercise. So I want you to pick a question out of these questions that I've listed below. And as I said, these are all from our behavioral-based interview guide. And jot down some notes to answer these questions using STAR format. Just pick one, and I'll pick one as well. We're gonna do, we'll do about 3 minutes, give you 3 minutes to think about an experience that would be relevant to any of these questions and answering them in STAR format. And then I can share as an example, and I'd love to hear anyone else's examples on the line. If someone feels comfortable to share with the group. So we will I will put 3 minutes on a timer, and we'll give you 3 minutes. All right. And just some additional insight here, guys. There's no right or wrong answer. I would love for people to share if they feel comfortable after our 3 minutes is up.
And 3 minutes is a long time in an interview, right?
That's very true.
Sit there thinking for 3 minutes about your answer. That may not be a good sign.
Yeah, that's a good point, John. Yeah, I think this goes back to planning ahead of time for your interview and making sure you've got some scenarios kind of in your head that you would use to answer an array of questions. Got about 30 seconds left. Alrighty, we're gonna go ahead and pause. I put myself on the spot and said I would come up with an example. So I guess I'll pick the question of describe a recent change or solution you came up with and help implement. How is this change or solution beneficial? And so my answer to that would be the situation at hand was that we had to, we as a company and HR had to find a way to differentiate Eli Lilly from the rest of the companies in the remote recruiting world. And so one change or solution that I came up with and helped implement was targeted recruiting through outlets like Handshake and a human resource management system we have called Yellow. I held, office hours. I created recorded Teams videos that were sent out through all of HR to help everybody acclimate. And additionally, one way that we set ourselves apart in the students' eyes is through Uber Eats partnerships, which is a partnership that I spearheaded with Uber Eats and Lilly to make our lunch and learns come to life by providing vouchers for students who are engaging in a Lilly event. We don't have that yet. It's coming next week, or else I would have made it part of this Illinois event. So sorry about that, guys. Okay, back to my answer. The result is that students not only get a true lunch and learn experience, but hopefully are more engaged with Lilly and think about us differently. And from a targeted recruiting standpoint, we're still able to identify top talent just through different means. Since we are not in-person recruiting and we are forced to resort to virtual means. So that would be my answer. Situation, obviously moving to a virtual world, that's the task at hand, is thinking about how we would differentiate ourselves and still recruit top talent. Our action is through targeted recruiting using systems we have and systems universities provide, as well as new ideas such as the Uber Eats partnership. And the result is hopefully top talent like you all will engage with Lilly and learn more about who we are. Okay, so I'm going to ask the 89, we've got 89 participants on the call. So I'm gonna ask a very brave soul if they want to share the question that they chose, as well as walk us through your answer. There are no right or wrong questions here. Or right or wrong answers, I mean, sorry.
I'll go if nobody else wants to.
Oh, I hear somebody, but I'm not.
Sorry, am I quiet?
You are a little quiet.
Is this better?
That's better. Tell me your
Okay.
name.
I'm Alex.
Hi, Alex. How are you?
Doing pretty good. Yeah.
Awesome. What's the question that you chose?
The one that I picked is about not being able to get everything on your to-do list done. So
Awesome.
this
Well,
happened. Basically, this happened to me when there's a day junior year when I had a paper due that was almost done, but I also had a test the next day. And more importantly, I had a track meet that day. So basically, track meets, that's just all the time from like after school to probably 10 p.m. It's gone. So there's no way I was gonna be able to like do the other stuff that I had to do. But basically, what I did is I just made my priorities, and then I told myself. At the time, I thought of this comic that I read called XKCD, and there's one of the jokes that he makes is that sometimes he spends more time figuring out what would be the optimal way to allocate his time than actually like being productive. So I thought about that, and I thought to myself, I'm not going to do that. And so I made the priorities. I believed in myself that I got them right the first time, and I just went for it because I was already thoroughly out of time. So
I love that.
a solution, I guess, is just tackle it.
What was the result of that specific scenario that you just mentioned? You said you had a test, a
Well,
paper, and a track
the
meet.
results, I guess, is that everything more or less worked out. I got a grade on the test that I was happy with, given the unfortunate circumstances. I still was able to do everything at the track meet. I didn't have to like bail out on my team, and the paper went well because I was almost done with it. And so yeah.
That's awesome. Well, thanks for sharing, Alex. I think the biggest thing as a recruiter, if you told me that I would take away is that you've learned how to prioritize items or events based on its importance. And so it's good to hear that that's a skill set that you've you know strengthened through that event. And so thanks for sharing. You're a brave first soul. We really appreciate that, and I appreciated hearing your story. So thank you. Um, Anybody else that would like to share the answer that they came up with to one of these three questions? I'm looking for one or two more presenters.
My name is David. I'll go for number
Okay.
three. Um, in my previous life, I worked in finance and the stock market, and the first half of the day was pretty much dedicated to trading portfolios. We had over 3,000 portfolios at our company, and our whole team was responsible with trading those once per quarter. So if you do the math, that's about 12,000 trades throughout the course of the year. And when you're just starting out as a portfolio manager, you need like a senior portfolio manager to kind of look over your work. And so it was a huge drain as far as labor was concerned, and the software that we used to kind of check these trades was very powerful, but also super dense with a lot of superfluous information. So a couple weeks into my position, I discovered the ability to basically create shortcuts or like a favorites menu that would allow that second pair of eyes to kind of see all the relevant data very quickly.
Yeah.
To sort of digging through menus and looking through all the relevant data formats. And so I actually ended up showing that to my manager. He brought it up with the software development team. And they were able to implement that into the next version of our software. That pretty much increased the efficiency of our trade checks by about 20%. And I actually was able to break the record for the number of single trades done in a day at the company.
That's awesome. That's amazing. First of all, super cool story. Second, I liked hearing a couple things I heard in that answer was one, I assume you were answering that second question of a recent change you came up with and helped implement. Is that right?
Yep.
Awesome. I think that's great. You took what sounded like a little bit of an overwhelming scenario and found a way to work smarter, not harder. And I think that's awesome. And additionally, what I liked is that in your result, you gave a tangible like a tangible number, which I think is great if you have that. And that's for all the students on the call, is if you have an experience where you can pull out, saving your maybe in an internship, saving the company. You guys are in engineering, so this would probably be more geared to finance, but saving the company money somehow, or with engineering, maybe creating a new system that, made things X% more efficient. When you can use those, if you have those tangible numbers, that always helps enhance the story. So great job, David. Thank you for sharing. Let's get an answer from one more participant on the call. Did I max out my participant sharing? Okay, no worries. Thank you, Alex and David, for sharing. And if anyone, wants to share later on in the presentation, feel free to interrupt me. I don't care. Okay, so some more common questions that are typically asked in a behavioral-based interview. I won't read all of these, but these are, again, all some questions from our interview guide. Tell me about a time when you were under a lot of pressure. What was going on and how'd you get through it? Give me an example of a time where you were able to successfully persuade someone who didn't to see things your way at work. I know another one that's on here. Talk about a time when you had to work closely with someone whose personality was very different from yours. Is a good question that comes up a lot. Essentially, what we're trying to understand is what skills or experiences have you had, and how did you handle certain situations, and extracting those from you, so we can better understand, again, how you would handle things in the future, or your strengths and skill sets for the role. And then what should I talk about? So some of the common questions that stump us all. Tell me about yourself. This is something I probably one of the first questions I ask, and the array of answers that I receive is enough to keep my job entertaining. Because I feel like you can take this question anywhere, but a good place to start would be your professional experiences and straying away from your personal details. So for example, you all are obviously in your academia right now, so talking about obviously like what your major is, but also what you're involved with, past internships, and maybe something that sticks out in those internships that you can bring about, would be a good place to start. But you don't want to ramble on and talk about personal details. Like, as a recruiter, I don't need to know about your personal details when I say, like, tell me about yourself. We want to know more about your professional skill sets, what you've been involved with at school, etc. What are your proudest accomplishments? List your strengths, areas for growth, and what do you know about our company? Don't be afraid to toot your own horn. I know for some, including myself, it can be a little bit weird to like brag about myself, because that's just not who I am. So I know that that's something that I struggle with in an interview personally, but don't be afraid to toot your own horn and talk about why you are strong in a certain skill set, or potentially a place where you could grow, because at the end of the day, as I said, this is just a mutually beneficial discussion to learn more about you and who you are, and for you to learn more about us as a company and who we are. Other interview tips: 3 questions you want to answer before walking out of an interview. I'll stop. Can anyone guess what these 3 questions are? You can either put it in the chat or hop off mute. What is the company culture like? A great question that you should definitely ask. Next steps, also good. Anybody else? Opportunities for growth. These are all great questions, and definitely things that you should ask. A typical workday for an employee with a similar position, the interviewer's opinion of the company. All great questions. I like the interview's opinion of the company. That's a great one. But the 3 questions that you want to answer before walking out of an interview. Oh, come on, buddy. Why the role? So why are you interested in, say, an engineering role at the company? Why the company? What interests you about it? Why are you passionate about it? And finally, and most importantly, why you? And so these are 3 questions that you should you should answer before walking out of an interview. And it may not be you blatantly saying like, oh, why me? Why the company? But whether it's in your answers or throughout your discussion, you want to make sure that you get these 3 answers, or these 3 questions across. Ask good questions. Never leave an interview without having asked a question. I could probably pull like a million recruiters who would say the same thing, because you know, you don't know what you don't know, and you can do obscene amounts of research on a company, but when you have an employee there who's a part of the company and who's been a part of the company, there's so many questions that you could ask to gain a better, gain more insight into not only the role, but the company. Some of the things that were mentioned in the chat are great. The culture, what the interviewer thinks about the company, the, you know, what does a day-to-day look like? Those are all great questions that you can ask if they haven't been answered already throughout the interview. And then follow-up. Follow-up super important, whether through call or email, or even a LinkedIn message. But make sure that you follow up with the person that interviewed you. I think it's a great best practice that can maybe get lost in the virtual world a little bit, but is definitely still equally as important as if you were in person. And then standing out virtually. Turn on your camera. I think that's step one in an interview, because you want to make sure that you are, you know, leaving some sort of impression, both visually and through speaking. Now, if you have camera issues, I mean, that's something you can't help, but if you have the availability to, and you're in an atmosphere where it's feasible, turn on your camera. Stay engaged and ask good questions. I love that we had some presenters on the call today, and we had some participants in the chat, you know, answering questions, because I think that's a great way to stay, you know, for me to know that you all are staying engaged. I know it can be hard sometimes being virtual and you know, having join a presentation where there's a PowerPoint. I know that can be tough. And so thanks for staying engaged, and make sure that you continue to stay engaged, whether that's at employer events or in an interview. Ask good questions, kind of goes back to what we just talked about. Follow up post event, not just in an interview, but also with, you know, events that are hosted with employers. It's always good to follow up if you're interested, and or just, I guess, want to say thank you. And then be proactive and reach out to recruiters. In the virtual world, it's tough because we lose out on some of those first impression face-to-faces, but we still do have first impressions via video. It's important that if you're really interested in a company, that you're proactive and reach out to the recruiters or your career center to get you connected with the recruiter from that company. Utilize your resources, because after these 4 years, finding a job looks a lot different. So be sure to utilize the career center resources that you have. And if you know, come across a recruiter on virtual campus and you want to know more about a company, or you're really passionate about it, be sure to stay connected with them and reach out. Ask for 15 minutes of their time. Worst that, you know, someone can do is say no. And I don't really think most recruiters will say no. And if they do, they'll direct you in the right place. So I feel like I've been talking for quite a while, so I want to turn it over to you all for some questions.